our special guest is Author Butch McDade. He's going to be talking about the Walker Sisters. He is a retired ranger from the park. He is also a successful author. And without further ado, I'm going to let him take the floor and talk a little more about himself and give us a wonderful presentation on the Walker Sisters. Thank you, Butch, for coming.
Thank you. Thank y'all for coming out tonight. It's a pleasure to be with you as we talk about a piece of cultural history of the Smokies, which is dear to my heart, and I hope yours too. Because as you know, there were a lot of people in the park before there was a park. Probably some of your relatives. In fact, the park didn't come about until 1934, and white people started coming into the Smokies about 1790s. Before that, we had our friends the Cherokee and other peoples in this area. So it wasn't a wilderness per se. In fact, when you go out to the Walker Sisters today, you get a false sense of isolation, don't you? It's pretty isolated out there today. But if you were in the area in the 19-teens and 20s or 1880s, I'll show you a map. I'm going to pass it around. This is a map of little Greenbrier where the Walker Sisters lived out their whole lives for about 80, 90 years apiece. And you'll see on there a lot of little dots, black dots. Those are other houses for people who are other walkers or Stennets or Metcalfs, like Metcalf Bottom. So the Smokies today is artificially remote as far as human history, in my opinion, because when we were talking about the heyday of the settlements here, like Cades Cove, Cataloochee, Cosby, all those big towns, Greenbrier down here, big communities. Greenbrier is just down the road. Y'all been there, you know what I'm talking about. Rainbow Falls Trail and all that. There were 1,100 people in there at one time. 1,100 people in Greenbrier down the road, where kind of near where Pittman Center is today. So we're going to talk about these people who resided in the Smokies prior to the park. And this will give you a clue about a small little settlement called Little Greenbrier. I just mentioned Greenbrier, which is down the road. Does everybody know where that is pretty much? Yeah, just go out here, take a left. A couple miles, you're in Greenbrier, there's a little sign. Pretty little place along the river. That's Big Greenbrier. A lot of the big mountain people say, that's Big Greenbrier. Well, we're going to talk about Little Greenbrier. And it is on the other side of Gatlinburg. You know where Sugarland's Visitor Center is. I've got a map, by the way. I'll show you. It's about 10 miles to the west of Sugarland's Visitor Center. So they call it Little Greenbrier. Greenbrier is a pretty common term in the mountains. In fact, if you're from West Virginia, there's a Greenbrier Resort. And it's a big, big deal up there, a big golf course and condos, etc. So Greenbrier, the word, is pretty common in the southern Appalachian Mountains. I want to tell you a story about, I go into the park pretty often, and I go to this site where the Walker Sisters resided pretty often because it's fairly close to our home. This is my wife here. It's about 15 miles, so I can, at any given moment, just say, I'm going hiking. And she said, where are you going? I said, Little Greenbrier. She said, okay, I know where you're at. In case you get hurt. And I go there a lot, and I usually go in the afternoon. I like to go this time of night, 5 o'clock, something like that. In the summer, of course, you know, summertime you can stay out there like 9 o'clock before it gets really dark. So I'll walk in. It's about 2.5 miles into the Walker Sisters. If you come in from Ware Cove Gap, out of Ware's Cove, Ware's Valley. And I walk in there usually at that time of night. Nobody's there. Everybody's already been there that morning and that afternoon. So they split. So you walk into the cabin down there, and you can sit on the front porch. Everybody been to the Walker Sisters cabin? Pretty much everybody here? All you guys? Yeah. I just sit in there, and I just sit there and I think. And one night I was there, about 4 years ago. Went in there on my own, and I was sitting there. And I like to walk out kind of at dusk. That's why I go that late. I like to spend an hour or two down there. Then I can make my 2.5 mile walk out as it starts to get dusk. That time of night is pleasant to walk in, I think. And I don't see anybody. I'm not a loner, but I like the quiet. And I like the mountains on my own. And that's hard to do sometimes in the Smokies. They have a trail to yourself. So I do get it. And one night I was sitting there and I had a little thought about these women, these Walker Sisters. There's 6 sisters there. They spent their whole lives. They were born in the 1870s, in the 1880s, in that house. And that house, and you can't see it, is adjacent to them on their left. That house was a 22 foot floor by 20 with a loft on top of it, with an attached kitchen or hearth and a porch. You know what I'm talking about? If you've seen it, I'll show pictures of it. And I started thinking about one of the sisters, Margaret, who was the oldest, who is this one here, who never smiles at all. She was the oldest of the sisters. Her name, she got it from her mother, who was a Margaret Jane King. She lived to be 92 years old, Margaret did, and lived almost, I guess, every day of her life until she went to a hospital in that cabin. And I started doing a little figure. I got my little pencil out in my little backpack, I had a little piece of paper, and I said, 92 years old, times 365 days a year. And I came out with about 35,000 days that that woman spent in that cabin and hardly went anywhere else. Yeah, she went to Knoxville, she went to Sevierville, she went to Maryland. I think they even once, a couple of times, they'd go over to Lake Junaluska to a Baptist convention there. But most of the time they spent at this environment, this home site, and it was all they wanted. They were rooted to the soil. In fact, when the Park Service tried to get rid of them, as they did for a lot of people, you know, a lot of people were in the Smokies prior to the park becoming a park. One of the first superintendent here at the Smokies was a guy named J. Ross Aiken. And Aiken had the problem, there was, of what to do with the Walker sisters, because they were one of the last people that were moved or asked to move from the park. And they resisted. Most of the time they'd say, oh, you know, let us think about it. We'll talk to our brothers and give us some more time to think about the price you're offering, because the Park Service would offer them a dollar figure based on the value of their property, the assessed value from the courthouse at Sevierville. So the Walker sisters kept putting up these little barriers, but give us more time. And they were, you know, they were old women, so the park rangers didn't want to become like ogres and try to run these ladies out of their home and then be subject to criticism. So finally, old Ross Aiken made his mind up that he was going to give them an opportunity to stay on the property, which is very rare. Most people did not get a life lease, as they call it. Most people had to leave. And he wrote to the secretary, or he wrote to the director of the National Park Service about these ladies when he was getting ready to make his decision, and he said this, he said, these old women are rooted to the soil. And he said, I'll paraphrase the rest of this, he said, and if we, the Park Service, push them out into the street, we would be subject to severe criticism, and rightly so. So he saw the idea that public relation-wise, you really didn't want to throw these ladies out into the street, because you may know this. By the time in 1940, when they were finally sold their property and took a life lease, they were already pretty doggone famous. They had been in the newspapers in Knoxville, Maryville, Sevierville. They even had a full feature article in April of 1946 in a magazine called the Saturday Evening Post. I remember that magazine. It's still around. It's not as popular now like it was. At one time it was sort of the, you know, the trendy news magazine of the nation, Saturday Evening Post. So you had a picture of Norman Rockwell on the cover every week. So they were famous. They had a following. They had people who were kind of watching for them and watching out. They had 4 brothers that left the valley there, left and married. And 1 sister. Out of the family had 11 kids. John Walker was the daddy. That's him with the cane. Old John Harry. They called him Harry Walker because of that big beard. Because there were other John Walkers in the area. On that map you can see some other John Walkers. And he was the daddy of these kids. 4 boys, 7 girls, and then the mother was Margaret Jane King. She was, her father had been Wiley King, who owned this property before John Walker married his daughter, and they took it over. So these people really were rooted to the soil. All they wanted to be was left alone to live out their lives. And a lot of times people ask, wait a minute, what did you say, seven sisters, only 1 married? Yeah, that's right. only one married. I'll show you a picture of these other married sisters in a minute. So 4 boys, they got married, moved out of the valley. One sister got married, moved out, but they all stayed in touch. Because remember when I said moved out of the valley, that made it just over in the Wares Valley across the ridge. Didn't move to Nashville or anything. They were in the area. They came and watched after the sisters. They helped them. They had cars. They had kids. So these sisters had a lot of nieces and nephews to work with them. And so the sisters, though, ran this house after 1921 when old John died. He died in 1921. So what I'm going to do is look at that, your handout there. We'll go through these sisters. You can keep that little handout because that is this picture. This picture was taken in 1918 by a guy named Jim Shelton. Jim Shelton was the husband of the only sister that married. The only sister that married was Sarah Caroline Walker. They called her Caroline. I've got a picture of her coming up. So Jim Shelton was a good photographer, but he was an amateur. He was just a brother-in-law. He worked for the Little River Railroad and Lumber Company. But he had a fascination about early 1900s with Brownie cameras. They were coming available, and you could get those. And this guy, even though he was an amateur photographer, he did great work. He photographed these sisters a lot. Before the park made him famous, he was photographed. So he gave us a lot of these early pictures, like this one, that show us what they looked like, who they were, the real people. They didn't expect to have to leave. They didn't expect that there was going to be a national park to come in here. Nobody knew there was going to be a national park here in 1918. It wasn't even started, the idea yet. So it was a real shock to these people when they finally, in the 1920s, people started a movement for a national park. And they would hear this. Hi, I'm from the state of Tennessee. We're going to be looking at buying your property. The state legislature in Nashville has authorized us to purchase your property because there is a national park going to be built. And the state of Tennessee is going to buy up properties on our side of the park, the projected park, and will then donate that land to the federal government. People probably went, what? Say that again? What are you talking about? I bet a lot of these mountain people when they heard national park said, what in the heck is that? Because they might not have been to Yellowstone. Remember, this is the 1920s. A lot of people hadn't been to Grand Canyon or Yellowstone or any of the Civil War battles. They might not even had an idea what a national park was. So here we go. Let's go over these ladies so you'll be able to identify them when you see photos later. You'll be able to keep that. So we'll start with old John there on the bottom there. John is the patriarch, as I said. The mama died. Margaret Jane King Walker died in 1909. And this is 1918. So John is still alive. He would die in 1921, 3 years later. So there he is over there. They called him Johnny Appleseed Walker because he had a lot of apple trees out there in that valley. The valley is called Little Greenbrier. We already mentioned that. And the family were farmers. What did people do in the mountains in the 19-teens and 20s or in the 1880s and 1870s in the southern Appalachians? What were they? Huh? Farmers. Blacksmiths, midwives, lumber people later, but they were farmers. And so these ladies and their brothers grew up with the idea that, well, this is a farm. We're going to run it. And then the boys moved away and started their own families and their own properties. But the Walker sisters did want to leave. And interestingly enough, and everybody usually asks me, why didn't the other sisters marry? That probably crossed your mind too, about why did they not marry? Well, 2 of them got engaged. Margaret, who is the one on the far right, and Holly, who was up by the boy. They got engaged to men in their lifetime prior to the national park, and the park came in when? 1934. So these ladies are out here in the 1870s and 1880s, so they're 20 years old by 1901 or so. So they were marriageable age, and in mountain ladies used to get married quite early too. Sometimes 16 or 17, you know. They didn't watch birth certificates very good back in there when they went down to get a marriage license. They just said, we'll marry you. So anyway, these ladies by this time had committed to being single. And the story goes, the way I understand it, and there's several different explanations, is Margaret here, the lady who never smiles in any of the pictures. She knew that after Daddy and Mama died that she would be in charge of the family, and that the property would be hers as basically as the lead kid, so she was old. So she felt some sense of ownership of this property, and she figured, well, I'm going to get married because I really need to stay here, and I don't know if all these sisters are going to get married, and I don't want to have them be here alone. So she, in those days, was called spinsterhood. Don't use that term today, but that's what they used back then. Old maids, sometimes you'd hear them called that. And she elected that lifestyle, mainly out of a sense of obligation to the farm, to the family history, to any of the other daughters who may not have had a chance to get married. And so the story is that she was very dominant in the lives of these ladies, Margaret was. And she sort of put the pressure of peer pressure on her siblings. Sometimes I've heard that, like I say, two of the sisters did get engaged, and then their boyfriends got killed in an industrial accident. And then they elected to stay. They were, one of them particularly, Katie back there, was apparently so distraught about the death of her boyfriend that she was a little bit unstable after that. So then the others kind of said, well, if I leave and get married, then Margaret's going to be here by herself. So there was a sort of snowball effect of all of them decided that we better help each other as we get old. And they did. Only one married, even though two were engaged. So that answers that question, I think, pretty adequately. They were sort of an internal dynamic about, well, if you leave me, I'll be alone. Your siblings can do things to you like that, or your older sisters or brothers sometimes, about orienting you to their point of view. So anyway, let's talk. There's John on the bottom left, and Margaret, the one who never smiled. I always say that because you never see her smile. She was the boss cook, according to Lew Bolton, on the top of there, the boss cook, running the farm after Daddy died in 1921. So there's Margaret. Then we have next to her is Mary Elizabeth. She was called Polly. That's on your sheet. Then you got that young man there. His name is Dan Walker. Giles Daniel was his full name, but they called him Dan. And notice Lila and I were looking at this photo the other day, my wife, and this is probably a Sunday photo because they're well dressed. They got this pretty good looking, even in black and white. They look like they're a special occasion. And Dan's sharp. Look at that dude. Mock turtleneck, got him a coat. I mean, he could fit in today at some places. Man, he's trendy, I think. And that's part of my talk is we think of these people as sort of remote and rustic and maybe backward, and they weren't. They were with it. They knew about the outside world. They had been to Knoxville. They had been to Maryland. And in this part of the universe, if you've done that, that's big. Back in the 19 teens, go to Knoxville. So anyway, that's Polly there. Then we have Martha on the far right on the front row. And Martha kind of looks like Margaret. I think has the same features, and a quiet woman too. Then on the top, we got Nancy, top left. Nancy died early. She died in 1921. She was, all her life, she had like respiratory troubles. So she died probably in her 30s, if I'm not mistaken. I've got her date of death over here. So that is Nancy. She's the first one to die, 1931. And after her death, for a long while, there were only 5 sisters there. And so a lot of the people who knew about the Walker sisters started to call that valley 5 Sisters Cove. You'll come across that reference in some of the books. 5 Sisters Cove. And then next to Nancy is Louisa. You might look at it and say, that's Louisa. Like May Alcott. No, it's Louisa. That's what she called herself. Put an I in there. And she's the one who wrote that poem I gave you. That little My Mountain poem. She wrote others about her environment. The Bear was another one. And she sold these rustic poems with a little, some kind of illustration at the top of them. She sold them to visitors who came to Little Greenbrier after the park was established, because you could drive up there to their cabin. You know, if you've been out there walking, you've got a road from the Little Greenbrier schoolhouse. It's gated now, But up until the late 50s and early 60s, you could drive up. And of course, you could walk in too in those days, and you could see these sisters on site doing their day-to-day work as farmers and as women, making quilts, making coverlets, canning, making apples, preserves, etc. Doing the things that had to be done for mountain culture. That's their environment. That's their milieu. Appalachian culture of the middle 1920s up till the 60s. So then next to Lew Isaac, Hetty, up there next to Dan. Hetty actually went off to Knoxville for about 2 years and worked in a hosiery mill. So again, they weren't blindly located just in Little Greenbrier. They know about the outside world and went out there. But all of them motivated back there. They did go off for a while because that was home, that was their family, and that's where they wanted to be. And that played a role, that sense of place, that idea that they wanted to be there, even though they could have gone to Knoxville. They could have married. They could have gone as a single woman to Knoxville or Maryville or Sevierville, but they wanted to be out there, the home of their family, that they grew up with. There's a strong sense of place for this family. It's remarkable, it really is. So anyway, a good picture of them in situ, on site there. And again, I think that's probably that's probably a church picture after church, I suspect. On the original picture, you can see a building over here. Well, if you'll go to the next slide for me, please. There's another picture of them with their sister who married on the far back right, our right. Got their real hairdo. That is Caroline. She's the only sister that married. And look at them. Look how well dressed they are there. That's obviously, I think, a photo made after church or at a special occasion. And it proves that they weren't backward old women like some people would paint them. They, in their youth, at least, after 40 years of farm living in cold and hot conditions with no electricity and no indoor plumbing for 70 years, took a toll. And you know they would. But look at them. You could drop those ladies into Chicago at the same date there and they'd fit right in with the way they look. They were not aberrations. They were not freaks. And that's one thing I like to point out is they were good people. They had that self-reliance of the mountain people. I might tell you a story about where we think these people got where they came from. There's a professor who's deceased now, a guy named Michael Montgomery from the University of South Carolina. He was a Knoxville native. He grew up in Knoxville and loved the Smokies. And he got a job as an English professor after he got his PhD at the University of South Carolina, and that's where he spent his career. Sadly, he died about 5 years ago. Great man. Got to talk to him a number of times. He was fascinated by these mountaineers, but he was also fascinated by their language. You may know, if you've been around here, some of the mountain people have a little dialect, don't they? Sometimes. And why not? They had gotten that accent from their forebears. Michael Montgomery was very fascinated by where did they get those terms in that language? And where did they get those songs? Because he was an academic sociologist, professor of English, and that was his baby. To look at mountain people in the Appalachians and trace back where did this stuff come from. Well, over his career, Montgomery traced back people like the Walkers, people like the Vogels, people like the, you name it. All the names were all familiar, the McCarters and the Huskies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He was fascinated by where these people's culture might have originated. So what he did over his time in the university, he started to spend his summers when he wasn't teaching by going over to the British Isles. Because the prevailing judgment in the 1950s, 1960s was that mountain people in the Smokies and perhaps even the lower Appalachians, Georgia, Carolinas, they got their language, that unique pronunciation from Old English, Elizabethan English. When I first started getting interested in this stuff about the mountain people in the 70s, the word was that, these people have the language of Elizabethan England, Shakespeare, 1600s. And for many a decade, that was the prevailing judgment, that Smoky Mountain dialects, particularly Smoky, but even up in Virginia, although Virginia was more, England, but that it came from the British Isles. But Mike Montgomery said, well, where in the British Isles? Because if you know about the British Isles, what do we have there? We got Wales, we got Scotland, we got Ireland, we got England. So where in those 4 different locales, which have different languages, I hope you know, if you go to London, it'll be different than if you go to Edinburgh, Scotland. Montgomery studied that over decades. And he conversed with people over in the British Isles who were also studying it from their angle about, well, where did these people from the British Isles go to once they left the Isles and moved to the New World? So we had a sort of a cross-cultural study. American scholars thinking about where did this language come from? English, Scottish, Irish scholars saying, yeah, where did our people go to? Where did they bring their language? And finally, Dr. Montgomery, and I think you've got the book here, wherever Kayla is. You've probably got it here. I'll see if I can see it. There's an Encyclopedia of Appalachia. But there's a dictionary of Smoky Mountain English. I know we have it here. You may be familiar with it. Big, thick book, big, thick dude. And Mike Montgomery edited it, or he put it together. Actually, he wrote it. And he used some research of a guy named Joseph Sargent Hall. Hall is not well known, but Hall was a great pioneer of the mountain language and mountain culture. He came here in the 1930s. He did a glossary. He recorded mountain people. He made over 100 tapes. He interviewed the Walker sisters. He interviewed others. And he left his recordings in the archives here at the Smokies, and he had his own copies. And when he died, or right before he died, he gave all his papers and all his recordings to Dr. Michael Montgomery, who put together a glossary. He used his own scholarly research and that of Joe Hall earlier, and he came up with this book called Dictionary of Smoky Mountain English, and I bet Kayla's got it here in her collection. Dictionary of Smoky Mountain English, you probably have it.
Yes, sir.
Done by Michael Montgomery and Joe Hall. And if you get a chance, look through that. But the bottom line, here's what Joe Hall and, here's what Dr. Mike Montgomery came up with in his theory, which is now pretty well accepted. He said, this is not Elizabethan English. It was here when the 20th century got here and people started thinking about where these people came from. It wasn't Elizabethan English. It had nothing to do with that. He said it was the language of Northern Ireland. You know Northern Ireland, you know Belfast in the north, and the Southern Ireland is the Catholic part with a different culture, basically. And it was the Ulster Scots. He said the language of these people here in the Smokies could be traced to Northern Ireland and the Ulster region, which is a collection of about 9 counties on the top right-hand corner of Northern Ireland. And it wasn't the Irish language, it was a language of Scots people who came over in a plantation system in the 1600s, where James I wanted to populate Northern Ireland with English and Scottish people because he wanted to anglicize those bloody Irish who were, in his mind, terrible people. The English have never liked the Irish, and it's a mutual non-admiration thing. And they brought their culture from Ireland and Scotland, England and Scotland, over to Northern Ireland, and then it developed there as a separate kind of dialect. And then, by the 1700s, a lot of those Scots-Irish decided they wanted to leave and go to the New World because you could get land and you could practice your own religion. You didn't have to become Anglican or Church of England. So many of them moved over to Virginia, to the New World, as land became available. And from Virginia, from the Carolinas, they moved into our area. And that's what Mike Montgomery says. This culture of the mountains is a culture that can go back to Northern Ireland, to the Ulster region, which is fascinating. And that's a good point. So these people represent that. Of course, by this time, these people have been away from the old world for 150 years, so they forgot all about it. They didn't know their ancestry.com. They just knew this was their home, but they had the language, the customs, and even the music. You know, we find a lot of traces of similarity between old-time music, American music, clogging with Irish dancing, fiddle tunes from Ireland and Scotland that now become bluegrass tunes in Nashville and Tennessee and other places. That culture can be traced back, country music, bluegrass, old time music back to the Northern Ireland region. And Michael Montgomery, thank you for that. So these people are that way. That's their culture, but it now has become Americanized. They've had 150 years or so away from the old world. It's a particular American dialect now, but it's different than what you would have spoken in Knoxville, Tennessee, or Chattanooga. It would have been totally different. And you probably know that. We've been in the woods sometime driving and going to a store and ask for directions. And you come out and you say, I don't know what that guy said. I think he said go this way. Kentucky, you got some of that, don't they? West Virginia, well, in our mountain culture. Anyway, a lot of you can turn to the next slide. Check this out. A minute ago we see these ladies when they're young. This is the last two remaining sisters that are on your sheet. That is Margaret and Louisa. In the late 50s. They lived, let's see, Margaret died in 1962, and she was born in the 1870s. And then Louisa, who wrote that poem, she died in 1964. Fascinating culture. Look how time and the vagaries of living a mountain life took on that, because it was a tough life. You didn't have any heat other than a fireplace. Didn't have any heated blankets, no comforts of home other than quilts in their own environment. But that proves the resilience and the hardship on these people, and they thought nothing of it. They didn't go around saying, oh, how haggard I am. They didn't look in the mirror and say, oh my God, this is life. This is what they expected. And that's that independence of those Scots-Irish who also had tough lives in the old world. And that's why they were resilient. That's why they were self-independent. And that's why they got things done like building structures, making farms. Do you think this land around here is the amber waves of grain of Kansas? No. To make a living in these environments was tough. Pretty much down to the bottomland was all that was worth a plowing. The other part was on the hill. That's why you find houses typically on the very edge of a clearing, because why put a house right in the middle? Because that's good land. You don't want to put a house where you could grow some, put it over in the land next to the hill where it's nasty. And also where there's a spring too, because it came down from the mountains. A lot of you hit it. Now, here's where we're talking about. Everybody knows, I hope, where Sugarland's Visitor Center is, right over here, 2 miles south of Gatlinburg. Everybody know where Sugarland's is? There it is. This is the Little River Road. Goes past Elkmont, comes on out, and it comes to a place called Metcalf Bottoms. It's a picnic area, pretty large picnic area. You've probably been there. And you turn right off the Little River Road and cross over the West Prong and the Little River. And there's also a little picnic area you get out on this side of the river too. A pleasant spot, pleasant place. And if you go from there, you can take a little road up and come into the little Greenbrier schoolhouse. There's a gravel road that you can go in on during the good months of the year. It's closed in the winter. Or you can hike it from up to the Walker sisters' house and the little Greenbrier schoolhouse from the Metcalf Bottoms picnic area. Everybody know what we're talking about? Metcalf Bottoms picnic area? Okay. So here's where the little Greenbrier is. Here's Metcalf Bottoms on the river. This is the Sinks. Everybody probably knows this is going out towards the Y at Townsend, towards Cades Cove. So the Walker sisters grew up right in here. Over here is Wares Valley, across this Cove Mountain here. And you can come in from Wares Valley on Line Spring Road, right? Everybody got that? And this is where I usually walk in. I take this 1.9 trail down to here, and then drop down into the Walker sisters. Pleasant little hike. You get good views of Wares Valley or Wares Cove, as this thing said. Does that help put it in place? This is Little Greenbrier, while over here to our east is Big Greenbrier. Okay, Bob. Today's part of the Great Smoky Mountain National Park, as we know, the most visited national park in the nation. They had 13 million visitors there last year, and the year before that we had 14 million. The only reason it went down is they put in a $5 parking pyramid. We'd be 15 million if they didn't charge $5, I think. Okay. Place to hike. Lovely place. That's what's got me involved. I love the hike. Appalachian Trail, great hiking. Hiking, also fishing. No hunting. But you can hunt in the national forest around here. Manahela Forest, Cherokee Forest, etc. Cades Cove. Who doesn't like Cades Cove? It's great. Great. That's why this is the most visited national park in the whole doggone United States. I was in Yellowstone a month ago. Yellowstone is a gigantic 2.5 million acre park. Parks over here is only 522,000. There's 2 million in Yellowstone. And how many visitors do you think Yellowstone gets a year? Guess. 5 million. How many did we get here last year? 13 million. We double what Yellowstone gets, almost triple. And it's in the east, of course. It's near the people, you know. You have to really want to go to Yellowstone. You don't just bop over there on a weekend trip. By the way, the weather's bad in Yellowstone, too. We got 4 seasons here, you know, spring, summer, fall, and winter. They have 2 out in Yellowstone. It's called July and winter. Okay, but this is also the land of our friends, the Cherokee. Yes, yes, yes. And before them, who knows what else? We had Mississippian culture. We had archaic culture. We had woodland culture before those people identified themselves as Cherokee. But these are Smoky Mountaineers too. In fact, a lot of the Mountaineers adopted the lifestyle of these people, learned how to make cabinets and stuff from our friends, the Cherokee. Cherokee are still here, although, as you know, we moved out the white Mountaineers from the park, didn't we? The Park Service in the state of Tennessee and the state of North Carolina in the 1920s and 30s. But 100 years before that, who else got moved out of this area? It was the Cherokees. 1830s. And a larger area too, not just the Smokies, but all the way up Alabama, Georgia, Kentucky, Virginia. But they're part of that, and they're still here with us, even though many of them had to leave and go out to the nations, the Indian territories of what is today Oklahoma. Many of them stayed. And we know it. They're in on our other side, North Carolina side and the Cherokee Qualla boundary. But this is the kind of people we were talking about, the mountain people who came here in the early 1800s, like this lady here. Miss Sophie Campbell out of Gatlinburg, Tennessee, grew up on Crockett Mountain just over here. Look at that face. That is mountain. That's Southern Appalachian culture there. That's the face of Appalachia there, and that corn cob pipe, etc. And then like, you know, this is, look at these people. Black Bill Walker from Walker Valley out in Tremont. You talk about, you think those people are have a lot of shame in their lifestyle or sad about their existence? Look at those faces. They're tough. They don't care. They don't care if you're from Knoxville. They don't need you. Self-reliant.
Was that one of the Walker brothers?
No, he was I think a second cousin. Yeah, you're right. Same name, Walker. Black Bill Walker, William Walker. He was a philanderer. Let me put it that way. He used to roam around the community. He had lots of wives, I understand. And he had a rifle called Old Death. And Old Death, he said, killed over 100 bears in his lifetime. Tough guys, you know. Wouldn't mess with these people back in those days. That's why the police didn't like to come up here and make moonshine raids. They knew these guys had Old Death with them. This is a neat guy, Levi Trenum. His cabin's out in Elkmont. Look at that face. These are from the 20th century. These pictures are from the 20s and 30s, not that long ago, 100 years. And they're proud people, aren't they? You don't see a face of pity and sorrow. No, they're proud folks. And they had no idea what was going to hit them, because what was coming down the pike was what? A national park. It would disrupt their lifestyle. And many of them had to leave. Walker sisters, I already may have told you, they got to stay on their property because that superintendent, Ross Eakin, decided, yeah, I'm going to let them stay because they have no other way to go. They don't have any family other than their brothers. They're not married. There's no support system other than themselves. But the other guys, he got to stay out in Elkmont too because he was also old at that time. But most of the thousands of people, and I asked Glenn Cardwell, anybody know Glenn Cardwell before? Yeah. Glenn died in 2016, right before the big fires. Glenn was the mayor of Pittman Center right down here. He was born in Indian Creek down here by Greenbrier Ranger Station and lived on Hills Creek just right down the road. And then got on with the Park Service and spent 34 years. And then ran for mayor of Pittman Center and 18 years as mayor. Great man, great man. I asked Glenn knew everything about the Smokies. And I asked Glenn, how many people do you think were removed out of the park to make it a park by the federal government and by the state government? And the state would be Tennessee and North Carolina, 2 states. He said, about 6,000 to 7,000 people he thinks were moved out. That's amazing, isn't it? Today, if you try to move out 7,000 people from a private property, you'd be in court for 1 million years. And rightly so. It'd be tough to do. TVA did that too, as we all know. TVA moved people to make reservoirs. And those were regarded as the improvement of the nation. And here, the people who wanted a national park thought that would bring economic development to this area. And boy, did they get that right. It did do that, we have to admit, even though it suffered quite a lot, these mountain people. The area really did get a lot of improvements for economics here, like this library and the city of Gatlinburg, and money and jobs. So we always give honor, always in my talks, take a nod of the hat to the mountaineers who had to leave, and to the Cherokee Indians who had to leave. We should thank them, shouldn't we? Because they sacrificed for us. 7,000 people had to leave so that 13 million could come here today, and that we could have jobs at Dollywood or jobs at you name it. There's a trade-off, but that is history. That's what happened, and I give honor to those people. Okay, love. And one of those people that we're talking about is that man, John Walker. There's old Johnny with the Johnny Appleseed. That's that picture. That's our man in the picture. There's a good quilt behind there. I'm sure his daughters did that. And John was the patriarch of that family. His wife, I don't have a picture of his wife. I can't find one anywhere. I've never seen one in any book or anywhere. She died in 1909. And I guess Jim Shelton had not taken pictures of her with his Brownie camera. We have him, quite a few of him. This man who's the daddy. Mother, I don't have a picture, and I've never seen a picture of her at all. She just missed the photographic history of the Smoky. But after his wife's death in 1909, of course, he stayed on until 1921 as the father, the leader of the family on their 122 acres. That's about what they had out there, little Greenbrier, about 122 acres. Most of it mountainous. They had a nice flat area around the house. They got a little creek, a little briar branch that drains the areas. It's pretty good land. It's very good. And so John is there older, but as a youth, he lived not over in Little Greenbrier. He lived across into just over the mountain from the house that we see today in Wares Valley, in a little community or a crossroad called Buckeye. Buckeye, that's what they call it out there in Wares Valley. You ever heard that term? Yeah, Buckeye. I don't even know where it is. It's out there near where the cemetery is, the Maddox Cemetery, because that's what his people settled on. And John went over in one day as a young man. He crossed over Cove Mountain and went into Little Greenbrier, probably to go to church, and he met a young lady who was Margaret Jane King, the daughter of Wiley King. I already mentioned him. Wiley King and his wife owned what we call the Walker Sisters place. They owned it at one time. And when he died, by the way, John married Margaret Jane King ultimately after the Civil War, and he took over as the manager of that place along with his wife. But hit the next slide. Before John got to be sort of the patriarch, a little event kind of interfered with his marriage to Margaret Jane King. It was called what? The American Civil War, 1861. John, as a young man, was fired up. He heard about it. He heard about President Lincoln's call for 75,000 volunteers to put down the rebellion in South Carolina at Sumter. And John, as a fired up young man, as a lot of us were when we were young, signed up. Now, he is from East Tennessee. Tennessee seceded from the Union in 1861. John is living in Wares Valley, Tennessee, or actually Little Greenbrier. What side do you think he decided to join up with? He's a Tennessean. Tennessee seceded, but there's another part of East Tennessee fact that you may know that would give you a different story. He was Union. Yeah. East Tennessee was predominantly Union in orientation, which is odd. And because the rest of Tennessee, I grew up in Nashville, and you know, even my in the 1960s and 70s, you did not vote for Republican because that was the party of Lincoln. You voted for Democrats. It's still staunchly Democratic. While in Knoxville, it's staunchly Republican. East Tennessee Republican because that was the party of Lincoln, and they were Unionists. Middle Tennessee and West Tennessee for years was Democratic to a fault because that was the party against Lincoln. History. Anyway, so John goes into the Union Army. That is a Union officer, but there were other men in our area. Hit the next one, Lila, who joined up on, and Johnny Rebs. You know, you might hear Kentucky and East Tennessee called divided loyalties, a brother against brother, and that may be true. We had some people, families that, one was Confederate in orientation, one was Unionist. So a lot of these fresh-faced young men went into war. They thought it would be a 90-day war like we all think when we go into wars. And it turned out to be a bloodshed for 4 long years where 600,000 people were killed, sadly. But John survived, but he did go as a Union soldier. A lot of people in there. These are not his pictures, by the way. They're just period pieces of Union soldier. John was fired up. He went in into an artillery unit. I'll show you the picture of the unit here in a minute. And of course, that's their life. Huh? Got a little squirrel, yeah. They found a little friend, and it was boring life. You didn't fight every day. You didn't have a Gettysburg or Shiloh battlefield every day, so there was a lot of downtime. John was, go back up. John there's a battlefield up here in Bull's Gap, Tennessee, right on the border of Virginia. And John got captured there as an artilleryman for the 1st Tennessee Light Artillery. He got captured by Confederates. And where did they send a lot of Confederates in the South in those days? Anybody know a place? I'll give you a clue. It was in Georgia. Andersonville. So he went to Andersonville. And after the war, after he was paroled out after the Union won the Civil War, he came back and told his daughters about his time there, how tough it was. And it was. Of course, the Union had some pretty doggone bad prisons too. They weren't treating them as friends. They had Rock Island, Illinois was brutal. One up in New York, I forgot the name of, brutal. Because the weather is a little bit better weather in Andersonville, Georgia than Utica, New York. But it was tough. John had that experience. He mentioned to his daughters one time that when he was there, he was impressed by a farmer in the area of Andersonville. Came in one day, he came up to the prison with a cartload of pumpkins. And he wanted to donate them to the soldiers there, even though they were federal. And the guards let him in, and this gentleman who was a farmer of that area, Confederate sympathizer, dumped out the contents of the cart on the ground, and they smashed all the pumpkins. But it was a treat for these soldiers. They were hungry, and they ravenously ate it up. And he remembered that good local farmer who brought a little bit of I guess you'd call it kindness to that harsh prison environment. But John did get out. He was paroled up through Kentucky down into Tennessee. Finally got back in 1866. He marries Margaret Jane King, and they move into the house that we call the Walker Sisters cabin today. And John took it over along with his wife, and then they commenced to have that 11-kid family. 4 boys, all of them married, 7 girls, and 1 married. And then the last sisters that we saw spent their whole life there. 34,000 days and nights at Little Greenbrier. Again, there's that picture of them when they're young, optimistic. There is the married daughter, Sarah Caroline. I got a picture of her. Nice quilt. Nice tulip poplar quilt back there. Nice little brood of kids. There's a picture of the church, the schoolhouse down there near about 6/10 of a mile from Metcalf Farms. You can go in that today, it's still there. John Walker, the daddy, helped with the corners. He was a good corner man. He could notch those tulip poplars trees very good. He was known as a master edge man or joint man. And there's that's nice exhibits there when you drive into the parking lot at the Little Greenbrier Schoolhouse. You take that gravel road in, and it has a picture of some of the Walker sisters here. Notice this thing says you could have kids who were young, very young, and you could have some teenagers in a class because the teacher, you didn't have grades, you just had one schoolroom, and they taught you as best they could. But here's a picture of showing that point. Here's some little dudes, young guys in this class. Little Greenbrier School, November the 1st, 1909, little dudes. And then there's Sarah Caroline, the sister who married. There's Dan Walker, the brother. This is Hetty. And that's one school. So just think of the challenge to the teacher to have to, I guess, cater to the different needs of all these different age groups. And that exhibit is very nice. Shows a picture of Mr. Matthews there, the last teacher in the schoolhouse. Okay, Bob. There they are, kids. Probably these pictures might have been made by Jim Shelton, I suspect. Jim was a great photographer. He did a great job. And it was also a church. School on the weekdays. Whenever they had sessions, the school sessions were as long as 6 months and as short as 6 weeks, depending on how much money the county had, because this is Sevier County, Tennessee. The Walker sisters had an address at 7 Sevierville. But sometimes it was hard to get a teacher to come here because you had to be unmarried, and you got to be willing to stay in the community for the term of the school, and that wasn't easy for some young people out of Knoxville or out of Maryland to do. So sometimes school was very minimalist indeed. But it served as a school and a church. So Sundays, it was a church, got the bell on top. You can see where the bell is. That bell is over in Warren's Valley at the church now. I should have known which church it is. It's still there. Somebody took it out after the park was established. All right, Lila. There's a good picture. There's old Herman Matthews in the last school in 1936, before the park made everybody leave except who? The Walker sisters. Those 5 sisters by that time. Remember, Nancy died in 31, so this is 36. You have 5 sisters in the code now. And it really became a remote site then. As that map shows you, it was never really an isolated place. It had other people. They had relatives. They had a community. But by 1936, only people there were Walker sisters. These kids lived outside. They came to school by either on the Little River train or walked in. Some of them walked 10 miles to get there. Okay, and you can still see in that schoolhouse some of the chalkboards if you go in there, and some of the desks. There's a picture. It had a cemetery there. This is an interesting thing. I want you to look at that cemetery. There was a cemetery for that community. Most communities had a cemetery, a church, where you, as a resident of that community, probably were going to push up daisies in your death. And I'll tell you about the Walker sisters. When they died, none of them were buried in this on-site cemetery, which is odd, when they would have been probably expected to be in that tight little community. I'll mention that in a minute. That picket fence is still there. You can walk that in there. Go ahead, Lyle. And there's a picture of about the 1930s of the Walker sisters' home. This red cedar is still there today. I like to go by that tree. It's still there, and it was there obviously when they were there too. All right, Lila. And the sisters worked the land after Daddy died in 1921. The will said that Mother and Daddy would give the home and the 122 acres to any unmarried children. That's the proviso in the will. So who was the unmarried children in 1921? All the 6 girls. So they owned the place after 1931 and ran it. Particularly Margaret. Margaret was the boss cook, the older woman, and but they did the work. That's outside the cabin, down, sort of going down towards the little creek, little Briar Branch. You can still see some of the terraces. I find you can easily see where they have a terrace here where they planted things. Then a drop down terrace, kind of like that perfect idea that you had terraces so that if water hit up here, it would percolate down on steps and not just rush off. You would capture it, just like Himalayan farmers have these terraces way up high in the Himalayas when you look at a hillside. Otherwise, it would just cascade down and the water be gone. Okay, right. So old John got old. 1921 he died. Sisters take over along with their brothers. They got help from their brothers, I mentioned that. They got help from the married sister. Sure, they didn't abandon them. There's 5 sisters after Nancy died, hence the nomenclature 5 sisters code. And you can see they're not those young girls anymore. This is the 1930s or 40s. They're born in the 1870s and 80s, so they're in their 50s. And harsh living conditions every day, cold throughout spring and winter, hot in the summertime. You know that it's not totally pleasant out there. Okay, Bob. There's another picture of them, and you have a car. This is probably this might be Dan, the brother, or Jim Shelton and his wife Caroline's car. They drove in. They came to see him on weekends. But they're still proud women. Their heads are not bowed. They're not forlorn, are they? No. They have that resolute look. And that's all they wanted. They told the Park Service, all we want is to stay here because that's what we want to be. We know about Knoxville. We know about the world. They knew about, even in 1960, we had Sputnik. They knew about that. But this is their home. That's all they wanted. Now we have 4 here. Look at a nice little doggie. I'm a big dog fan. I want to have a bunch of rescues. We like doggies. And she, Liza there has a nice little doggie. And look at those nice squashes and pumpkins. This is a picture colorized. One of the few we have of these sisters. And the reason it's colorized is in April of 1946, I mentioned earlier that the Saturday Evening Post came to the Smokies and they asked the Rangers, we want to portray your park. It's 10 years old, 13 years old. We want to do a spread on this park that is already attracting millions of people. And it had. By the 1940s, we already had over 1 million people come to the Smokies. So they came out here and the Rangers said, go out and see the Walker Sisters. Fascinating people. Give you an idea of the history of this park. So this is a picture taken from the article 1946, April. And it's colored. And it put these people on the map. They're already on the map locally because the local newspapers highlighted the fact that there were 5 women living out alone. And it was really weird back in those days. Today you wouldn't say, look, you're mountain people. But it was odd then. So they were kind of famous. But notice, look at Margaret over there. The lady never smiles. She's got that head up like that hand out. Not like sheepish or forlorn. That's all. I like to point that out. Okay, love. And these are some good photos taken by a National Park Service photographer named E.E. Exline, Edward E. Exline. He was a government employee, and he came out there, and you know where this is. This is the port. Everybody's probably seen it. That's where I go and sit and do my thinking a lot of time when I go out there. And they had the loom. I got some other things of plain living, as the old Foxfire book said, plain living items. I'll get the next one. This is Liza, churning butter. They're in their 50s, but they're still doing daily chores. They're not getting a government check. They're not getting food stamps. They're not getting SSI. They're working for it. Now, brothers help them, other sisters help them. Yeah, but still mountain people. But that lifestyle before the national park, even before the national park, and one of the reasons why I had a national park, we had an industry move into this area of Little Greenbrier about the 1901 period. And it was located out of Townsend, Tennessee. It's called Little River Railroad and Lumber Company. A company out of Pennsylvania. A company that already had cut down millions of board feet of timber up in the northeast, Pennsylvania and other places. And they came south because it was still open country, good timber, and available, and cheap. And so Little River Lumber Company moved in. They called the town that they located in Townsend after their owner, called Colonel W.B. Townsend. Before that, that town had kind of been called Tang, Tennessee. I heard Tang was the name. And they moved in all over the west side of the park. In addition to that, on the east side of North Carolina, because on that side, logging is going on, because this is private land. It didn't come up park until 1934. These guys moved in 1901. They cut timber in the Smokies up to 1939, even after the park was established. And it changed the way of life. Not only did the park change these people's lives, but the timber industry did, because they came in here and took out large amounts of timber, and it was perfectly legal. We didn't have any laws against logging in those days. If you bought property rights to logging, you just cut it. Clear cut, not this, what they call it today, sort of, I guess, with the sporadic cutting where you leave some of the original growth, move over, take some clear cut, and leave these pristine areas there for future growth. Wow. This is actually the trail or the area of the Laurel Creek Trail today. Laurel Falls, I should say. Laurel Falls, just outside of Sugar Land, about 3 miles on the way to Elkmont. A lot of damage. It was perfectly legal though. There was no environmental protection agency, no Sierra Club here. It's a private land and you can do what you want, and rightly so in those days. And they did. They did a lot of harsh timber work. They took out about, I forgot how many board feet were taken out in the totality of the Smokies. I'll give you this factor, though, a fact. During the time of the logging, which went on from about 1901, heavy scale logging on both North Carolina side and the Tennessee side, 75% of the park's land was logged or farmed. 75% of the land before the park was logged or farmed. That means today, when we go into the park, we're not looking at the old growth forest unless you get up there at Newfound Gap and above there. Everything down below has been touched and regrown. That just shows how prolific the forest was to regenerate in 80 years. Because remember, this logging ended in 1939, not that long ago. And it was a heavy duty. We have a nice museum over in Townsend, which was the headquarters. If you haven't been to that museum, it's very nice, free. Check it out. Now, this company also didn't just send in trains to take out timber. They brought in passengers too. It was a passenger route. You could take a ride from Knoxville in the 19-teens and 20s into Elkmont particularly. And at that time, Elkmont had a bunch of resort communities. Nice cabins were being built. You can see them today. Some of them have been torn down, but we still have some that are restored. Elkmont was a big resort town for people out of Knoxville particularly. Not the mountain people, but outsiders who had cabins.
And they brought in passengers.
And I think that Mr. Jim Shelton, that photographer you were talking about, he kind of had a sideline job working for the railroad, but he would take pictures out of Metcalf Bottoms as they came by. Or they stopped there, and he'd say, I'll develop this, and on the way back after you spend all day at Elkmont, 6 or 7 hours, you can stop here, have the conductor stop, and you can buy your picture, because I will have it ready. And apparently he did. It was kind of like the original kind of quick shop, photo shop. Entrepreneurs. But by the 1920s, there were people in Knoxville particularly, and Asheville, North Carolina, who were thinking that we ought to have a national park in the eastern United States, and particularly in the southeast. These two people, the Davises, Mr. and Mrs. W.P. Davis out of Knoxville, they were wealthy people. They'd gone to Yellowstone in about 1922 on a train. And then they, when they came back after experiencing Yellowstone, and I think probably Glacier, Mrs. Ann Davis is given credit to broaching the idea to her husband and to the boards of directors of the Knoxville Automobile Club and the Knoxville Chamber of Commerce that when we were in Yellowstone, we saw all kinds of lodging. There was restaurants. People came from Chicago on trains. They were getting money from tourists. Why don't we try to do something like that here in the Smoky? We have mountains. And even though they had been heavily logged, there was, again, that top 25%, which was still pristine. So she broached the idea. A lot of people give her credit as the founder of that Smoky Mountain idea, the Smoky Mountain National Park idea, Ann Davis there, and it was successful. At first, people were skeptical on the Knoxville border, what do you call it, Chamber of Commerce, that, it's been logged, we can't have a park. And she kept saying, no, roll back, and it did. And by and large, they pushed it, hit the next one. And this guy really pushed the idea. Who's ever driven Chapman Highway? Well, yeah, probably, maybe you go home every night on it, don't you?
No, I do not. I have been on it.
Named after Colonel David Carpenter Chapman, a wholesale druggist out of Knoxville, Tennessee, who was inspired by the Davis's idea that he put his whole efforts into that idea. He ran with the idea. He pushed it. A lot of the impetus for the park was on the Tennessee side. North Carolina, they really wanted, the people who wanted the park, they were looking at Grandfather Mountain primarily, which is a nice place. But they have finally, after compromising through politics and money, both sides agree, let's have it in the Smokies. We'll have the Tennessee side, we'll have the North Carolina side about equally divided, and we'll try to push it like that. And that's what they ended up with. So they finally got a national park by 1934. National Park. And little did they know then that this thing would become the biggest national park in the nation. People thought, well, it'll be a nice park. We'll bring in some money. One of the great impetus for the Smokies Park was what? Conservation, but what else? Cha-ching, money, economic development. You bring tourists from Ohio and Alabama, and you can take their coins right out of their pocket by having a motel and a restaurant and gas station. Because they were coming in car. By 1940, the park was established in 1934. By 1940, we got Franklin D. Roosevelt to go by right downtown Gay Street near the Tennessee Theater, like you see here. He was coming here after taking a train from Warm Springs, Georgia, where he spent his summers in the hot pools because he was polio victim. And he goes right downtown, he's got the governor of Tennessee there, he's got his wife, there's old FDR, hi buddy, great man. There's the governor of Tennessee, there's Eleanor Roosevelt, they were right by the Tennessee Theater downtown, and they're on their way up Chapman Highway to come to where? Newfound Gap in the Smokies, September the 2nd, 1940, a great day. There's that monument up there at Newfound Gap, which was the Rockefeller Memorial to, there you go, there's old FDR, nice color, I love those color house postcards. Those things are great. Done by the Klein Company out of Chattanooga, Tennessee, mostly. There's a great picture. Lala Wilson is my wife here. Her mama is in that picture somewhere. Is she? We don't know her.
My father-in-law was there.
Yeah. It was a great day. September 2nd, 1940. Came 6 years after the park was established. And these people were litter bugs. They didn't have that ethic yet about not throwing your trash on public land. But we'll give them a little grace. Those guys in white, who are these guys in the uniform? Anybody know? CCC, that's right. Who did a great job here on developing the park. You know, Civilian Conservation Corps, 1930s, during the Great Depression, people out of work. Franklin D. Roosevelt came up with this idea. Let's have some public service work with these guys. Men in the CCC, but WPA and Women, Works Progress Administration. They paid them a grand total of $1 a day, $30 a month, but you got some meals, you got dignity, you had something to do instead of languishing in Schenectady, New York, or Chicago, or Atlanta. And really, they did great work. Most of the infrastructure you see in the Smokies is credited to the CCC. Really, they did remarkable work. Great men, great ideas, and then after the World War II began, what did these guys do? They left the CCC while they were in peacetime, doing good work, and most of them went en masse into recruiting stations and went to war against Nazi Germany and against Imperial Japan. Great heroes, great Americans, these boys and girls, because of the women on the WPA. They helped the nation during a time of need. That's great stuff. That's the original tower up on Klingman's Dome. The CCC built that. Today you have that nice kind of spaceship kind of design, spiral staircase. And this is the Little River Road. That was the old Indian head, and I think it's cracked off now. I don't think it's that prominent. But that's the old railroad. The Park Service took over the Little River Railroad's routes and made Little River Road. If you ever go to Elkmont from Sugarlands, and if you go from from Sugarlands all the way out to the Y at Townsend, you're following the old route of the Little River Railroad. And it was a rough road today. It's a great little drive along the Little River. There's Newfound Gap in its inception, where the state of Tennessee built their section of the road up to Newfound Gap, and then North Carolina built their section, and they joined there at Newfound Gap, and later it was modernized into a nice road that we have today. Tennessee section is real steep. North Carolina side is much more kind of a slow moving route. But a great picture of the development of this park. This is not this is a made park. It wasn't like Yellowstone where you just said, it's federal land, let's make a park. These people had to, this is private land that had to be made. There's old Herman, but by the time all this was going on, all this movement for a national park, people were still living in the park up to the 1930s, 40s, going to school, doing their normal farming, like the Walker sisters, who will continue to live in their house. This is the Noah Budd house. The Walker sisters started to notice by the 1930s, though, abandoned buildings around them, because people were being moved out, like these folks. Good quality buildings, but they become vacant. Smoky became quiet in the 1930s, when before you had heard the sound of farming, animals making sound, blacksmiths making sound. But the Walker sisters continued on in their life, living, as we said earlier, farmers, making a living, and that's all they wanted. They didn't care about what was going on in Germany in World War II. I mean, they certainly wanted America before, patriotic, but their lives were here, doing what their mama and daddy had told them to do and taught them to do, and that's what they wanted to do. This is an interesting little photo. This is WBIR-TV in Knoxville. I found this on their page. That's a picture of the the porch today, and they morphed in with the image of the original sisters living there. And there was a historic photo showing them in that location. I thought that was kind of neat. There's the,
Sorry.
That's okay.
there's the spring house down below that. The spring house is still there, today. And there's old Louisa and Margaret up there. As they said, every day, and people came there. Visitors came, they made money. And these ladies are actually the first entrepreneurs and the Smokies, first tourists, because they were selling things, selling jars of apples and butter, apple butter, and honey, and quilts and coverlets, and poems. That's where that poem came from. Louisa wrote that and sold it to people for a quarter. And made a little cash. They were in the vanguard of our tourist cash economy. But Smokies developed. This is Gatlinburg. This is the old Mountain View Hotel. They had Wiley Oakley, a famous guy who was a mountaineer from Gatlinburg. He took tours out of that up into the mountains. The tourism industry grew. Gatlinburg grew. The park got over 1 million people by the late 40s. It became a big park. And people swarmed here because it was within driving distance of a lot of people, even in the 1940s, even if we didn't have interstate highways. A lot of people came from Indiana, Kentucky, Alabama, Carolinas. And you can see that. What drew them? This and other cute things. I remember this as a kid. We'd just come up here in the 60s, and you'd have bear jams, and the little guys would be almost taught by road memory to go out there into the middle of the road, and tourists would give them a piece of bread from a hot dog or whatnot. It was dangerous. You don't see that today because we don't want that, because they get hurt, they get run over, people get hurt, accidents happen. But that was the Smokies, and that was an attraction. Park rangers back in the old days thought they would allow this because it would help bring tourism and happiness to the visitors. And it did, but it wasn't good. It wasn't environmentally or productive. But how many times did I remember, you see, even today, who's driving out to Case Cove and all of a sudden just stop? And you sit there for 10 minutes without moving, and when you finally get there, there's a bear sleeping in a tree. And everybody stopped to watch it, and rightly so. As long as you don't get within 100 feet of it, you know. But the rangers started to come in. We had the Park Service starting to make a scene with their activities of guiding and preserving. That's up in Newfound Gap on the other side. Ranger basically getting close. We wouldn't allow that today. Rangers wouldn't do that. That's against the rule to be that close to an animal. And what do we see today? Well, if you've been up to for the parking permit, you find all kinds of jams up at Allen Cave Trailhead or Chimney Tops. And this is Laurel Falls on this doesn't seem to be relaxation to me. But if that's all you can do, if that's the only day you can get there, go for it. I'm a believer in come on in, it's your park. People have a right to be here. The American public have a right to be out there. But the Walker sisters continue to live their life on up to the 1960s. As we said, the last sister died in 1964, Louisa, and there she is there on the churn, and there's Margaret up there. A lot of days they just sit out there their whole lives, 34,000 days and nights a year, doing the plain living activities of mountain people. They were living a life in the 1950s and 60s that was more alike their parents of 100 years earlier. That's how valuable these women were in terms of giving us a living history idea. We could see it. In the 1950s, you could see these people doing things that in the 1850s, other mountain people were doing too. That was living history. That's really living history. And that's their value. They continued to live, do the things they had to do. Gen Con. There's Dan, the brother with the spring house, which is still there today. Still has water, nice flow. There's Oklawaza in the interior of the main room. That's that 20 by 22 foot main bedroom with trundle beds, all kinds of stuff up in the ceilings. Notice on the wall you got newsprint, newspapers on the wall. You just take a little bit of flour and water, make a little paste, and then plaster that stuff up on your walls to cover the open chinking. And there's the other. This is looking from the main bedroom into the porch. There's Louisa, and then there's Peggy there. You can see a nice weapon up here. Nice smooth bore weapon. So I bet they shot a few deers and a few bears and a few rabbits until the national park told them they probably couldn't do it anymore because they had visitors coming. There's a trundle beds here. Look at the newsprint on the wall. Look at all that hanging. Stairs up to the loft. When the family was intact, like the brothers and Daddy would stay upstairs and the women would stay downstairs. Louisa described describe the house as in a state of organized confusion. And it looks like that's what it is. So today, you can go out there anytime you want to. It's open all the time. And the Walker sisters lived out there 70, 80, 90 years, every day in the hot summer sun, or the cold days of winter. Well, for 90, 80, 70 years, it took a toll, as you can imagine. No heat, no electricity, no indoor plumbing. But that's all they wanted. And they lived in it, my gosh, 70, 80, 90 years, they weren't doing bad. I mean, city workers, city dwellers are probably not living that long. So I don't feel too sorry for them. They lived a lot longer than a lot of our city folk who live in cities with coal smoke from coal fires. So anyway, here's a couple of pictures I'm going to close with. That's the last two sisters. I think this is the 1950s. That house is still there. There's that cedar tree that's still there. There's their little doggy. How they got their little doggy. How they like doggies. And you can see time has taken its toll from those pictures when they were young, vibrant women, 90 years, 80 years of living, as it always does to all of us, particularly if you live outdoors like that and have the elements. And there they are at the end, still bright, still vibrant folk. They're buried, not in that cemetery that I mentioned in the valley, at that church, which I would have thought they would, because remember, all through their lives, they had fought to be not taken out of the code, out of Little Greenbrier. And then when they die, they're taken over across the mountain into Wares Valley to Daddy's cemetery, the Maddox Cemetery, which is still there today. You can go find them. It's down by the Wares Valley Fire Department behind there. You know, there's a sign on the road, Maddox Cemetery Road. Just go down and turn left, go up in there. You'll find them. They're all in line. This is Daddy's gravestone. Private John Walker, Company E, 1st Tennessee Regiment of Light Artillery. He was born in 1941. He died in 21. His wife died in 1909. She died very young, early. But that's their heritage. That's why we can go there today and sit on the porch like I do sometimes and just think about what did their lives there. And they were emblematic not only of them, but other mountain people who spent thousands of days doing what they had to do to make a living. They knew about the outside world, but to them, this is home. And they would have still been there if we hadn't had a national park. Their descendants would have been there. I'll leave you one thought about the national park, though. Well, I'll give you one more. Let's see. Yeah, I lead tours in there. This is one I led. You can go in there anytime you want to. You can walk in there at night if you so desire. Just watch out for the copperheads and the timber rattlers on the road. Have a flashlight. Great in the winter, too. It's a great winter hike if you can get in there. Down to McDade Farms. Very nice. It's not long. But that's their legacy. But I want to tell you, if you've been up to the Smokies, many of these mountaineers that had to leave obviously were bitter at the government, weren't they? Having to leave. I would be too if I was living in Casco or Cataloosa over in North Carolina, Cosby, a little 20 mile, you name it, that the state of Tennessee came to knock on your door. So we're going to buy your property. You're going to have to leave, but not right yet. We'll tell you when. That was a shock, as we said earlier. But if you go up into the visitor center at Smokies and you see the movie there, how many have seen the movie? I have a number of times. You have. Great movie. It's 25 years old. It's still good. At the end of that movie, you'll see a lady come out dressed in the attire of the 1870s. Lucinda Ogle's her name. She's a Gatlinburg resident, fine lady. She was a daughter of Wiley Ogle and a mountain family, a lot of heritage. And in that film, they filmed Lucinda Ogle walking dressed up as a mountain lady up at the Noah But Ogle cabin, which is up in Cherokee Orchard near Gatlinburg. And you see her walking, and then they zoom in on her, and she says, she's talking about the coming of the national park. She says, when we heard about the national park, it was like death hit up on the country up in here. Death hit up on the country. Then she says, but she said that right after that, she said, but now I thank God for the park so that it can be preserved, her heritage particularly, and that she says, so I can hear the sweet sound of the birds. So that's a testament to a mountain person whose family had to leave, and yet many years later she saw the economic benefits to the people. And if there hadn't been a park, would we have the cabin at Little Greenbrier preserved? No. Would we have the buildings at Cades Cove preserved and mountain people culture? Probably not. So in essence, the park saved their culture too, and at the same time as stopping it too. And here's a book that kind of gives a taste of that. It's a good book, you're going to read it. Cades Cove by Durwood Dunn. Cades Cove, the life and death of a southern Appalachian community. That's a good way to put it. These mountain people had communities that were vibrant. When the park came around, it was the death of it. But those people still, as resilient as they were, they moved into Gatlinburg, Sevierville, Murphy, North Carolina, Boise City, you name it, and they're with us today and their descendants. So, I hope you enjoyed that little survey of the Walker Sisters and their fascinating culture. If you hadn't been out there, try to get out to the Walker Sisters. They'll be closing that road, the gravel road in there, end of this November. But you can always hike up. It's 6/10 of a mile from the McDade Bottoms picnic area, across the river on the bridge, up to the church, schoolhouse, and then you got 1.1 miles from there. So it's a round trip of about 3.6 miles. A little uphill, but not bad. You're on the road most of the time. The beginning of it has that little rise, like you said, it has that water tower. Does anybody have any questions?
How close could you park
Pardon?
to the, how close could you park to the Walker Sister homes? Because I know they had a sign out there and it directed people to where the
Yes,
home was.
it did. At one time they had a sign. You could drive right up to the cabin.
But you can't now.
Oh no, they stopped that 60s, 70s.
But you can still
When
drive into the
When the
church.
Walker Sisters died, they blocked the road off.
Right.
And because they didn't want that place to be ravaged. Plus the Walker Sisters left a lot of stuff in there. The family, what happened is, when you sold your property to the government, they told you, we're going to give you fair market value if you leave. If we give you a life lease, which is very limited, you got half the money, but you could stay. Walker Sisters took that half money and stayed. But when they died, they left a lot of that stuff that was in those cabins, all that. So the family was given a chance to say, come in and get what you want. But they left stuff. So the park took it over. They gave it to the Great Smoky Mountain Natural History Association, which is today called Smoky's Life. Changed the name dramatically. Wow, they did. And that it is those belongings that they got after the last sister died in 1964 are out in Townsend, Tennessee, at the Heritage, at that next to the Heritage Center. There's an archive building there. For years they were stored over in Oak Ridge at a warehouse, but now they're on site on the edge of the Smoky. And you can go over and see them. You have to make an appointment with a guy named Mike Ade. He was a great guy. The park archivist. He's a great guy. And he'll help you look for anything you want on the history of the Smoky. But they are emblematic, I think, of a lot of the mountaineers. Ogles, the John Oliver family, you name it. The Whaleys out here in Greenbrier, you name it. The Walker Sisters give flesh to the bones of the mountain people. Thank you all for listening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Butch, and
Sure.
also thank you all for coming to our program. We're very grateful. We're really excited. This is a new program that we have developed. The Our Stories series is celebrating the Appalachian culture and how the library serves the community. So we are very grateful for Butch taking time to be part of our guest. His books are in our collection, by the way, and not only that, he donated his full collection of anything he has written into, from his books to articles, and everyone's welcome to come anytime to look at them. And speaking of McDade, he's the librarian and archivist of the National Park Archives. Now, you have to schedule an appointment with him. That's very important to mention, but he's been very helpful, and I've just recently, again, have sent emails to him about information. So if you have any questions, you can contact me anytime, and if I don't know where to get, if we don't have it here, or if I don't know about it, I know someone to recommend it to. So thank you all for coming, and have a great night, okay? One more time for Butch. Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you for letting me. She allowed me to put in my collection about 60 articles and 2 books. I've written a couple of articles about the Walker Sisters. You can look at this collection if you want to now, Walker System material, or check with the Smoky Mountain Historical Society in Sevierville. They have a museum downtown in Sevierville, and because they are fascinating people. But all the families of the history of this park are worthy
Thank you for
of
coming.
information. Thanks for coming. Thank y'all. Thank you. Yeah, somebody, I think you got a question.
Yes, there was
It's
a,
about a mile, you have to.
there was a
walk
story,
from the house.
I don't know if it's true, that one of the sisters, when the park was trying to get them out, wrote some essay or something about you spend so much effort preserving the animals, what about the people? Is that
Yeah,
true?
it was a poem, I didn't bring it, it's called The Bear. The Bear, it's one of Lew Bolton's poems. You can look it up, I think it's in that book by Rose Houck that you probably have, The Walker System, and it's in
Yes.
there. Because Louisa wrote that one too, My Mountain Home, the Little Greenbrier Schoolhouse, and The Bear. And in that Bear poem, she's got a not so subtle jab at the fact you're saving the property of the home of the bear, but you're making us leave.
Yeah.